Arizona, under a burning sun, became the stage for a moment that felt less like a memorial and more like a reckoning. Thousands of people poured into the desert city, not just to mourn, but to declare their presence, their beliefs, and their defiance. Flags rippled in the dry wind, red and blue fabric clashing against a cloudless sky. Some held signs of faith, others raised portraits, and together they formed a sea of conviction that stretched farther than the cameras could capture. The air was thick with chants that rose and fell like waves, sometimes solemn, sometimes thunderous. For many, this was not just about one man's death. It was about showing the world that his voice still lived in theirs. Parents clutched their children's hands tightly. Veterans stood tall in uniform, and families carried flowers as if each bloom was a statement of survival. But not everyone came in silence. Beyond the rows of mourners, another sound emerged. Jeers, taunts, and signs that turned grief into spectacle. The divide was unmistakable, and for a moment, Arizona became a mirror of the nation itself. What unfolded next would leave even the loudest voices stunned. Charlie Kirk's memorial service was never destined to be a quiet goodbye. From the moment his name first echoed across campuses and television screens, he had become something more than a man. To his followers, he was a torchbearer in America's cultural wars, someone who dared to say the unsayable, to push boundaries that others tiptoed around. To his critics, he was the embodiment of division, a provocator who thrived on outrage. That tension, so present in his life, now pressed heavily on his death. The sheer size of the gathering testified to his influence. Thousands did not come to Arizona simply out of duty or obligation. They came to affirm that his message, however controversial, had not been buried with him. They came in buses from Texas, caravans from Nevada, and flights from every corner of the nation. Each arrival felt like a pilgrimage. Each face in the crowd was a story of alignment, of choosing a side in a battle larger than themselves. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. Rows of mourners stood shoulder to shoulder, united in grief, but also in determination. For them, this service was not only about honoring Kirk's memory, it was about cementing an ideology, preserving a narrative that critics had spent years trying to dismantle. The speeches, the chants, the sheer spectacle of bodies filling every inch of space, all of it pulsed with the weight of unfinished business. And yet, beneath the solemn hymns and folded flags, there was something more. This was not just a gathering of the faithful, it was a declaration of resistance. Every chant carried a message. We are still here. Every flag waved like a challenge, daring opponents to dismiss them. For those inside the memorial hall, the loss of their champion only sharpened their resolve. In their eyes, his death was not an end, but a rallying cry. But as powerful as the service was for his supporters, it revealed the depth of America's fracture. Outside, voices rose in dissent. Some stood with placards mocking the legacy being celebrated within. Others chanted slogans designed to pierce the solemnity of the occasion. To them, Kirk's influence had always been toxic, and they saw no reason to let death soften their stance. Their presence transformed the memorial into a battleground, one side cloaked in mourning, the other in derision. This duality gave the day an uneasy electricity. Reporters whispered that they hadn't seen crowds this divided since the protests that had gripped the nation years before. Police formed lines, wary of confrontation, while journalists scrambled to capture the clash of symbols and stories unfolding before their lenses. It was as though the memorial itself had become a referendum on the meaning of Kirk's life. And the symbolism was unescapable. Here, in the desert heat of Arizona, America was once again staring at itself in the mirror. One side saw a hero gone too soon, the other a figure whose influence had been corrosive. Between them stood the future of the very values Kirk had fought to define. This wasn't only about remembering. For some, it was about reclaiming a narrative. For others, it was about dismantling it once and for all. And though the chants, tears, and speeches carried through the air like competing hymns, a shift was coming. A moment would soon arrive that neither side could ignore. But before long, the mood would shift, and America would be forced to confront its reflection. For every mourner who traveled miles to honor Charlie Kirk, there was a critic eager to strip meaning from his passing. In the days leading up to the memorial, social media brimmed with commentary that revealed not compassion, but calculation. Some rivals used his death as an opportunity to score political points, crafting barbed tweets that mocked his legacy, reducing years of activism into a punchline. Others filled talk shows with smug assessments, calling him a divisive figure, better forgotten than praised. This was not grief. It was opportunism dressed as analysis. While supporters poured into Arizona with flowers and folded flags, detractors circulated memes mocking the very idea of a memorial. The tone was less sorrowful reflection and more gleeful dismissal. Their message was clear. They believed Kirk's death marked the end of a movement. In their arrogance, they treated a man's passing as proof of their own superiority. And yet the hypocrisy could not be ignored. Many of the same voices who demanded civility in past tragedies now reveled in cruelty. They who once preached tolerance found it easy to sneer at those grieving. The double standard stung deeply among Kirk's followers, who saw in this mockery not only disrespect for their leader, but contempt for themselves. The contrast was striking. While thousands prayed inside, whispering blessings and holding back tears, others sneered outside, their signs painted with slogans meant to provoke. Some shouted that history would erase Kirk's name. Others suggested his death was justice. In that clash of tone, reverence within, ridicule without, the depth of division revealed itself. But arrogance has a way of blinding those who wield it. In their rush to celebrate a man's downfall, critics overlook the resilience of those who loved him. Every jeer outside only strengthened the resolve of the mourners within. Every mocking post online only deepened the unity of the crowd that had gathered. Far from dissolving a movement, the disdain of Kirk's detractors was forging it into something harder, sharper, and more enduring. Because there is a simple truth. No community rallies more fiercely than one that feels underestimated. As the sneers grew louder, the prayers rose higher. As critics tried to erase Kirk's story, his supporters etched it deeper into their hearts. What his opponents failed to grasp was that mockery rarely silences memory. It amplifies it. The day of the memorial, that lesson began to take shape. The contrast between arrogance and grief was undeniable. And though the critics smirked, certain they had the upper hand, they missed the quiet power of thousands moving in unison, bound by loss and purpose. But arrogance always underestimates the power of a community united in grief. To understand why thousands braved the Arizona sun to honor Charlie Kirk, one has to step back and trace the path that brought him to that moment. A path defined not by silence or compromise, but by audacity. From his earliest days as a student activist, Kirk carried himself with a conviction that unnerved his rivals and electrified his followers. He wasn't polished in the way political elites were. He was raw, sharp, and unafraid to say what others only whispered. That roughness became his signature. Where others hesitated, he thrived on confrontation. At a young age, he co-founded Turning Point USA, a student-driven movement that quickly grew from a small campus effort into a national phenomenon. What began as tabling on college quads turned into arenas filled with thousands of young people chanting, cheering, and finding their political identity. Kirk wasn't just speaking to them, he was speaking for them. He positioned himself as the voice of students who felt ignored, mocked, or belittled by institutions that claimed to stand for diversity but left no room for dissent. The establishment scoffed at first. They dismissed him as another loudmouth destined to fade into obscurity. But every insult hurled his way only seemed to build his momentum. He thrived in debates where others wilted, his sharp retorts and bold assertions spreading across social media like wildfire. His critics saw arrogance, but his supporters saw courage. The willingness to take the blows, to face hostile crowds, and still walk off stage unbroken. In him, they saw themselves reflected. Young, underestimated, dismissed, yet determined to be heard. It wasn't long before his influence stretched far beyond the college campus. National media platforms invited him on, sometimes to challenge him, sometimes to exploit his controversy for ratings. Each appearance added fuel to his growing profile. His speeches stirred audiences who were hungry for representation, and his unapologetic style struck a chord with those who had grown tired of polite debates that never seemed to change anything. But it was more than showmanship. For many of his followers, Kirk created a sense of belonging. At Turning Point rallies, young people who often felt isolated in their beliefs discovered they weren't alone. They found community in the chants, solidarity in the applause, and identity in a movement that told them their convictions mattered. Critics may have scoffed, but for his supporters, Kirk had built a lifeline. Even as controversies mounted and opponents worked tirelessly to discredit him, Kirk leaned into the storm. Every headline labeling him as divisive, every viral clip meant to humiliate him, became proof to his base that he was over the target. They admired his stamina, his refusal to retreat, his insistence that the louder the backlash, the more vital the fight. He carried their frustrations on his shoulders and turned them into fuel for an expanding movement. This is why his memorial became more than a farewell. To his supporters, Charlie Kirk wasn't just another political figure who had come and gone. He was a fighter who carved space for voices long excluded. He was a symbol of defiance, a rallying point for a generation told to sit down and stay quiet. And that's why his memorial wasn't just a goodbye. It was a declaration of survival. As the memorial unfolded inside, the contrast beyond its doors sharpened into something unavoidable. The quiet hush of prayer within clashed against the rising din outside, where protesters had gathered with their own agenda. Their voices cut through the air, chants rolling like drumbeats. No hero here. Don't rewrite history. They came not to mourn, but to remind the world of their disdain, to challenge the very idea of honoring a man they saw as a symbol of division. Inside, the atmosphere was starkly different. Families clutched one another, hands folded, tears slipping silently down cheeks. Mothers whispered comfort to children too young to understand the gravity of loss, while elderly veterans stood rigid, saluting the memory of a man they believed carried their values into the future. Every hymn sung within those walls felt like a shield against the chaos erupting just beyond them. The line between both worlds was guarded by police. Officers in dark uniforms formed a human wall, their expressions unreadable, as they stood between mourning and mockery. On one side, flowers piled higher than the podium. On the other, cardboard signs waved defiantly, scrawled with slogans sharp enough to wound. The tension in the air wasn't just about Kirk, it was about the two Americas colliding, face to face, unwilling to yield. Chants met counterchants. Supporters exiting the service lifted their voices in defiance. We remember. He lives on. The collision of sound echoed down the Arizona streets. Two choirs singing rival hymns, each convinced their truth was the only one worth carrying. It was no longer a memorial. It was a confrontation staged under the desert sky. And within that clash lay the deepest stakes. For the families who had come to grieve, Every taunt outside felt like a knife twisted into already tender wounds. They weren't there for politics, they were there for closure. Yet the critics refused to allow silence, refused to grant even a moment of peace. To them, the memorial was not sacred, it was a stage, and they intended to seize it. Still, the resilience of those inside could not be overlooked. With each attempt to disrupt, the mourners held tighter to their rituals. The singing grew louder, the prayers more fervent. If the outside world wanted to turn Kirk's death into a spectacle, his supporters would answer with solemnity, with dignity that refused to bend under pressure. The clash reached a point where even the officers standing between them seemed to brace for what might come next. It was no longer just a question of chance, but of which force would dominate the narrative: grief or anger, respect or derision. Both sides seemed unwilling to yield ground, unwilling to quiet their voices. But what happened next silenced both sides, at least for a moment. Inside the memorial hall, as chants and jeers echoed faintly from the streets beyond, the crowd waited for what they knew would be the centerpiece of the service. The air had a heaviness to it, like the pause before a storm. People shifted in their seats, holding hands, clutching tissues, bracing themselves. Then the lights dimmed just slightly, and a lone figure stepped up to the podium. The speaker paused. That pause was everything. It cut through the tension, commanding silence not by demand, but by presence. Thousands of eyes lifted, thousands of breaths held. For a moment, the sound of protest outside faded into nothing. All that existed was a room full of people, hearts thudding, waiting for words they knew would outlive the day. Charlie Kirk, the speaker began, voice steady but carrying a weight that drew the room tighter, was not perfect. None of us are. But what he was, and what he dared to be, was unafraid. The crowd stirred, heads nodding. Some wept quietly. Others closed their eyes, absorbing each syllable as though it were scripture. He walked into debates where he was mocked before he opened his mouth. He faced headlines written to tear him down. He endured ridicule, scorn, and even hatred, not because he sought chaos, but because he refused to surrender his voice. And for that, thousands found theirs. The words carried like an anthem. The speaker leaned in, voice rising, filling the cavernous hall. Look around you. Look at this sea of people. This isn't just grief. This is proof. Proof that a single young man with conviction can ignite something that no insult, no smear, no death can extinguish. A wave of applause broke through, but quickly faded as the speaker raised a hand. Another pause. Suspense tightened like a rope. Charlie's voice may be gone, the speaker declared, each word cutting with precision, but his echo will shape America's future. The hall erupted. Cheers collided with sobs, a cacophony of grief and pride. People stood, some raising fists, others holding hands high in prayer. Tears streamed freely, not just from sorrow, but from recognition that they were part of something bigger, something that had survived even the grave. Outside, the protesters heard the roar from within. For a moment, their own chants faltered. The energy of the crowd inside, though muffled through walls, was unmistakable. It was raw. It was alive. Inside, chants of "He lives on! He lives on!" thundered across the hall. The sound reverberated, bouncing off walls, amplifying into something that felt less like a chant and more like a promise. Children on their parents' shoulders joined in, their small voices merging with thousands of others, forming a chorus that seemed to rise above grief itself. For the critics, this moment was a problem. Online, some tried to drown the eulogy in sarcasm. They clipped the speech, mocked its emotion, dismissed its impact. But those efforts collapsed under the sheer force of the crowd's reaction. Every attempt at derision was buried under images of mourners embracing, of faces shining with both tears and pride. What critics called theatrics, supporters recognized as truth. The speaker did not stop there. They will try to tell you his story ends here, they said, voice now shaking with intensity. But look around you. Do you see an ending or do you see a beginning? Beginning, voices roared back, the sound rolling like thunder. This is not silence. This is the rising of a movement too deeply rooted to be torn down. This is the legacy Charlie leaves us, the courage to stand, the strength to speak, and the conviction that no one can erase us. The crescendo peaked. The hall, once filled with whispers of mourning, now trembled with the sound of conviction. It was a transformation in real time. Sorrow turned into energy. Loss shifted into defiance. People hugged strangers beside them, linked not by familiarity, but by shared resolve. Even the police outside felt the shift. The tension that had been mounting at the edges of protests softened, if only briefly, as the chants inside seemed to eclipse those without. Reporters typed frantically, trying to capture what was happening, but the truth was that it could not be confined to headlines. It wasn't just a eulogy, it was a rallying cry. And then, just as it had begun, the speaker fell silent. The room hung suspended in that silence, waiting for one final word. Finally, with deliberate calm, they leaned into the microphone. "Charlie is gone," they said, voice low but carrying. "But we are here. And because we are here, so is he." The hall exploded once more, but this time the noise was different. It wasn't just applause or chanting. It was release. It was catharsis. It was the collective exhale of a community that had found its strength in unity. The moment carried beyond the walls of the memorial. Clips of the speech rocketed across social media, trending within minutes. Hashtags ignited. Supporters called it the speech of a generation. Critics scrambled to reframe it, but their commentary drowned under the tide of raw, unfiltered emotion. And as the echo spread beyond Arizona, the nation itself began to tremble. The mic drop moment inside the memorial did not remain confined to the walls of the Arizona Hall. Within minutes, clips of the eulogy began flooding social media, carried by attendees who had captured every word, every tear, every eruption of applause. What started as a local tribute surged across timelines with the velocity of a breaking storm. Hashtags like #KirkLivesOn and #EchoOfCourage shot to the top of Twitter's trending list, soon joined by #ArizonaFarewell and #VoiceThatEchoes. On TikTok, short edits of the speech racked up millions of views overnight. Teenagers who had once watched Kirk spar in viral campus debates now shared side-by-side montages of his past clashes with the final words spoken in his honor. On YouTube, compilations of the most powerful moments from the service appeared within hours, some uploaded by professional outlets, others by ordinary fans who simply wanted to preserve the moment. Each video seemed to pull more eyes into the orbit of what had happened in Arizona. Memes flourished, as they always do in moments that stir both reverence and ridicule. Supporters shared images of Kirk overlaid with his sharpest lines, paired with captions proclaiming him a fighter whose message could not be silenced. Critics, however, tried to twist the event into satire, using humor to undercut the solemnity. But in the sheer volume of tributes and testimonials, the jokes felt drowned out, overwhelmed by a tide of sincerity. Politicians quickly sensed the momentum. Some, particularly those aligned with Kirk's vision, issued glowing tributes on social media, calling him a patriot, a warrior for his generation, and a symbol of conviction. They promised to carry on his mission, invoking his name as though it had already become a banner to rally under. Others, just as predictably, struck a different chord, using the moment to question the celebration of such a polarizing figure. Their critiques sparked heated arguments in comment threads and live streams, pitting grief against politics in real time. But for many ordinary people, the reaction was far more personal. Across platforms, fans shared stories of how Charlie Kirk had changed their lives. Stories of lonely students who found community through turning point events, of young people who felt dismissed until they heard him argue unapologetically for their beliefs, of families who saw him as a role model of boldness in a world that often demanded silence. These stories gave the viral wave a heartbeat, transforming the service from a political flashpoint into a deeply human narrative. It wasn't just online. Local radio stations replayed the eulogy, television anchors dissected the speech line by line, and commentators debated whether the memorial had signaled the rebirth of a movement. Some warned of radicalization, others spoke of inspiration, but no one could deny that the moment had landed like an earthquake. What was clear was that the ripples were spreading far beyond Arizona. From college campuses to Capitol offices, from family dinner tables to digital chat rooms, the name Charlie Kirk was on everyone's lips again. Love him or loathe him, his memorial had reminded the nation that he was not easily erased. But beyond the noise, one lesson began to emerge, and it's bigger than politics. In the aftermath of the spectacle, as hashtags cooled and pundits moved on to the next skirmish, what lingered was not merely the name Charlie Kirk, nor the controversies that followed him in life. What remained was the undeniable truth that words, wielded with courage, conviction, and clarity, carry power long after the voice itself is gone. His memorial, far more than a farewell, became a mirror for a nation wrestling with its own divisions. The lesson was not about taking sides, nor about enshrining every belief Kirk ever voiced. It was about recognizing that, even in conflict, one individual's presence can ignite a movement, stir loyalty, and force society to confront the questions it prefers to avoid. That is the paradox of voices like his. Whether one loved him or loathed him, silence was never an option. His existence demanded engagement, and that in itself is a kind of legacy. The scene in Arizona proved something larger than politics. When thousands braved the desert sun to stand shoulder to shoulder, it wasn't ideology that bound them. It was dignity. It was the human need to affirm that someone they believed in had mattered, that his echo deserved to live on. The protests outside, the online sneers, even the heated debates in Congress could not erase that elemental truth. Dignity had found its voice, and in that moment, division could not smother it. There is a universal resonance here. History rarely remembers the intricacies of arguments, the exact phrasing of policy disputes, or the petty exchanges that dominate headlines. What it remembers are the moments when people chose to show up, to bear witness, to assert that conviction still has weight in a cynical world. In the end, Kirk's memorial was not defined by the sharpness of his words, but by the gathering itself. Thousands proving that the courage to stand together still matters. And so the story that began with a polarizing figure ended with a broader truth. Legacies are not measured by unanimity, but by impact. The debates will continue. The divisions will remain. But the sight of that crowd, defiant in grief and unyielding in pride, left behind a simple moral. In the end, it wasn't the arguments that mattered. It was the fact that thousands showed up, proving dignity can still outshine division. Arizona's burning sun bore witness to more than a memorial. It bore witness to a movement declaring itself unbroken. What began as a headline, "Thousands attend Charlie Kirk's memorial," transformed into something deeper, proof that legacy speaks louder than mockery, and that truth will always outlast arrogance. The images remain etched in memory, families holding flags close to their hearts, voices raised in both grief and defiance, a community refusing to be diminished by cynicism. It was not just a service for one man. It was a testament to the enduring weight of words and to the power of showing up when it matters most. That is the clarity we carry forward. Legacies are not erased by jeers. Dignity is not undone by division. And a single voice, when it resonates, can ripple through the soul of a nation. If you believe voices still matter in America, if you believe dignity deserves to be louder than hate, then share this story, subscribe, add your voice, and help keep the conversation alive. Because the echo we choose to carry forward is the one that will define the future.